He served her divorce papers on the day her company failed. 5 years later, she stood in the rain outside his headquarters, watching his empire crumble. She hadn't come for revenge. She'd come to collect. Her name is Ilara Vance. 5 years ago, she was the discarded wife of Mafia boss Kazuo Mori, left with nothing but a broken company and a shattered reputation. This is the story of how she built the Vance Group from the ashes, not just to survive, but to systematically dismantle the very empire that cast her out. It begins with a single, burning question. What happens when the person you underestimated becomes your greatest rival? To understand the scale of her revenge, you must first understand the depth of the betrayal. Ilara and Kazuo met in a boardroom, not a back alley. She was 28, running a promising logistics tech startup called Locus. He was 39, the sophisticated public face of the Morikai, a syndicate laundering millions through legitimate fronts. He presented himself as a venture capitalist, a silent partner. She saw a path to scale. It was, she would later say, the perfect misunderstanding. Their marriage 18 months later was a corporate merger disguised as a romance. Ilara gained access to capital, connections, and a ruthless business tutor. Kazuo gained a brilliant CEO to legitimize his operations and a beautiful wife to complete his executive portrait. For 2 years, it worked. Locus grew, its algorithms optimizing shipping routes for major ports. The money was clean, the growth real. But Ilara was operating in the light, while Kazuo's empire was rooted in the dark. Extortion, smuggling, and the quiet coercion that was his specialty. The first crack appeared not as a shout, but as a silence. Ilara proposed expanding Locus into blockchain-based supply chain verification, a system that would create transparent, immutable logs. It was the antithesis of Kazuo's shadow trade. He vetoed it with a smile. Too much sunlight, my dear, it burns. The second crack was a name on a transfer she wasn't meant to see, a shell company funneling Locus profits to a known arms dealer. When she confronted him, the mask didn't slip, it changed. The venture capitalist was gone. In his place was the boss. You run the company, he said, his voice chillingly even. I run everything else. The final fracture was both professional and deeply personal. Ilara discovered Kazuo was using Locus shipping containers to move contraband. She had built a legitimate empire, and he was using it as a Trojan horse. She threatened to go to the authorities, to burn it all down herself. That's when he made his move, not with violence, but with paperwork. He had been preparing. While she was building, he had been weaving a net. He served the divorce papers on a Tuesday. The same day, a coordinated attack hit Locus. Whistleblower allegations, planted by Kazuo's people, accused the company of fraud. Key investors loyal to Kazuo pulled funding. The bank called in its loans. By Thursday, Locus was in receivership. By Friday, Ilara Vance was erased. Her name was dragged through the financial press as a failed, reckless founder. Her assets were frozen, tied up in the divorce and bankruptcy. Kazuo emerged unscathed, his interests protected by layers of legal insulation. He offered her a severance, he called it, a small apartment and a modest monthly stipend, enough to survive, not enough to fight. The message was clear: know your place, stay quiet. This is the documented pattern experts call wife abandonment syndrome, the sudden dismantling of a shared life, where the husband rewrites history and leaves the wife financially and emotionally stranded. Ilara's experience was a corporate-grade version. She was left with $73 in her personal account, a suitcase of clothes, and a reputation in tatters. Kazuo believed he had neutralized a threat. He had, in fact, created his own. For 6 months, Ilara vanished. The business world assumed she'd had a breakdown. Kazuo's men reported she spent her days in the public library. They weren't wrong, but they missed the point. She wasn't reading novels. She was reverse engineering his empire. She mapped his holdings, the chain of nightclubs that were cash funnels, the import-export firms with odd shipping patterns, the real estate holdings purchased with inexplicable speed. She studied his weaknesses, not the violent ones, but the business ones. His over-reliance on a few key corrupt port officials, his friction with a newer, hungrier syndicate moving in on his territory. His legitimate fronts were bloated and inefficient, propped up by illicit cash. Her first move was not a company, it was a persona. Using a forgotten secondary degree in accounting, she became Elena Vale, a freelance financial consultant specializing in troubled small businesses. She took on clients no one wanted, a struggling warehouse in the Docklands, a family-owned customs brokerage on the verge of collapse. She worked for peanuts, but she demanded total operational access. She was learning the guts of the logistics world from the ground up, street by street, invoice by invoice. And she was making connections. The dockworkers Kazuo exploited with loan-sharking debts. The trucking company owners squeezed by his protection rackets. She listened. She offered real solutions, fair deals. She built a network of loyalty, not through fear, but through respect. It was a currency Kazuo had never understood. The seed of the Vance Group was planted with a single client. Old Man Rai ran a nearly bankrupt storage yard right next to a port terminal controlled by Morikai. Kazuo's men had been trying to force him out for years. Ilara, as Alina, didn't just save the business. She showed Rai how to secure a city contract for emergency overflow storage, a contract with legal protections that made him untouchable. The victory was small, but the blueprint was there. She replicated it, a struggling freight dispatcher, a small-scale fuel supplier. One by one, she identified the pressure points in Kazuo's logistical chain and fortified the businesses he preyed upon, turning them into independent, resilient nodes. She wasn't competing with him yet. She was immunizing his prey. The money for this, it didn't come from investors. It came from the very system Kazuo thought had broken her. She found a clause in the labyrinthine divorce settlement, a non-disclosure agreement with a severance penalty. By meticulously documenting his illegal use of locus, she quietly forced a renegotiation, not through courts, but through the threat of exposing him to his more cautious, legitimate partners in Tokyo. The settlement was confidential, but it was enough. A war chest hidden in plain sight. Kazuo, monitoring her stipend account, saw only quiet desperation. He saw the library visits, the modest apartment, the consulting gigs. He dismissed her. His new focus was his impending merger with the powerful Choi family, a union that would cement his legitimacy and double his reach. His fiancée, Seo-yeon Choi, was a socialite with a razor-sharp business mind and a family empire built on construction and finance. The wedding was to be the event of the season. Ilara watched the announcements in the society pages. She saw the photo of Kazuo and Seo-yeon, polished and powerful. She felt nothing but a cold, clarifying focus. The pieces were on the board. Her network was live. Her capital was ready. She dissolved the persona of Alina Vale. 1 year and 8 months after her empire fell, Ilara Vance incorporated the Vance Group. Its public-facing mission was bland, integrated logistics solutions. Its private purpose was a declaration of war. She didn't rent a flashy office. She took a lease in the very Docklands warehouse district Kazuo viewed as his slum. Her first employees were Old Man Rai, the dispatcher she'd saved, and a few of the most disgruntled, honest ex-managers from Locus who had seen the truth. They operated in silence for months, a ghost in the machine. Then she made her first strategic strike. The city put out a bid for a new digitized port management system, the very kind of transparent, efficient system Kazuo had vetoed at Locus. His bid was arrogant, inflated, relying on his political connections. The Vance Group bid was cheaper, smarter, and built on the ground-level data Ilara had collected for 2 years. She didn't just win the contract. She took it from under the nose of Choi Construction, Seo-yeon's family firm, which had been the guaranteed winner. The news was a small footnote in the business section, but for those who knew, it was a shockwave. Kazuo Mori read the report in his penthouse office. He saw the name Vance Group and the listed CEO, Ilara Vance. For the first time, a flicker of something other than contempt crossed his face. It was the first cold drip of realization. The ghost had a name, and it was hunting. Kazuo Mori's first instinct was not anger, but a cold managerial curiosity. A problem had surfaced in his operational matrix. He summoned his consigliere, a man named Gyro. "The Vance Group," Kazuo said, tapping the newspaper. "Due diligence. I want to know her burn rate, her backers, her next move. She is a ghost. Make her solid." He believed this was a containment exercise. He was about to learn that Ilara had built a mirror, and he was staring at his own reflection. Gyro's report, delivered 48 hours later, was unnerving in its simplicity. The Vance Group had no debt. Its capital structure was opaque, a series of private trusts. Its clients were the very small businesses Morikai had been squeezing, the storage yards, the dispatchers, the fuel suppliers. Ilara wasn't just competing, She was consolidating his own neglected infrastructure into a cohesive, efficient network. She had turned his scraps into a kingdom. She is not targeting your strengths, boss, Gyro concluded, uncharacteristically hesitant. She is methodically deleting your weaknesses. Kazuo's response was a classic mob play, coercion. He sent in forces to visit Old Man Rai. They found the yard gate locked, a city official on site inspecting the new municipal contract, and a private security detail, licensed, armed, and recording. The message was clear. This asset was now protected by law, not just loyalty. Similar visits to other Vance-affiliated businesses met with identical, polished resistance. Ilara had anticipated him. She had lawyered and fortified every node in her network. His second move was economic. He instructed his controlled banks to call in any outstanding loans to Vance Group suppliers, hoping to create a liquidity crisis. The crisis never came. Ilara had established a private credit line through a consortium of Asian investors unknown to Mori Kai, a network she'd cultivated as Elena Vale, connecting legitimate overseas capital to undervalued local assets. She had built a financial firewall. Frustration began to curdle into something darker. The Vance Group's next move was a masterclass in asymmetric warfare. Kazuo's empire relied on a delicate ecosystem of corruption, 10 key port officials across 3 terminals who overlooked discrepancies in container manifests for a monthly premium. Ilara didn't expose them, she made them obsolete. The Vance Group launched Verity Chain, a blockchain logistics platform. It offered shippers a small discount for using fully documented, digitally verified containers. The selling point was efficiency and insurance savings. The unspoken effect was that any container not on the Verity chain was now a glaring anomaly, automatically flagged for customs inspection. Officials on Kazuo's payroll found themselves scrutinizing meaningless, clean shipments while the real contraband, stuck in the old system, was getting caught. The premium payments kept flowing, but the value, the protection, evaporated. He was paying for nothing. Kazuo was losing control of his ports, and his fiancée Seoyeon Choi was noticing. The Choi family valued stability above all. Seoyeon, a Harvard Business School graduate, reviewed the missed port contract and the rising operational friction with cold eyes. "Who is this woman?" she asked Kazuo over tense dinner. "A nuisance from my past," he dismissed. "She is a structural problem in your present," Seoyeon corrected. Her family began a quiet review of the merger terms. Meanwhile, Ilara was executing a pivot that would reframe the entire conflict. She realized that to truly dismantle him, she needed to attack not just his operations, but his legitimacy, his coveted place in the light. She needed to beat him at his own game, high society. Using capital from her now profitable operations, she made a series of shrewd, quiet investments, not in logistics but in culture. A struggling contemporary art gallery in the fashionable Insadong district, a boutique sustainable fashion label, a niche publishing house. These were not just businesses, they were keys to a world Kazuo and the Chois desperately wanted to inhabit, the world of taste, of philanthropy, of accepted power. She then leveraged her most powerful, unexpected asset, her story, not the truth, but a curated version of it. She granted a single, exclusive interview to a prestigious business magazine. The narrative was one of resilient comeback. The fallen tech founder, unfairly maligned, who found redemption in rebuilding the backbone of the city, the hard-working logistics sector. She spoke passionately about ethical business, transparency, and giving small entrepreneurs a chance. She made no mention of Kazuo Mori. She didn't need to. The subtext was a damning contrast: the innovative, self-made woman versus the shadowy, old-world syndicate. The article was a sensation. Ilara Vance was reborn as a symbol of righteous hustle. Invitations poured in, charity galas, museum openings, policy forums. She attended them all, a vision of understated power in tailored suits, speaking softly about supply chain theory. The city's elite, who had once shunned her, were fascinated. She was their thrilling, slightly dangerous redemption story. Kazuo first saw her across a crowded room at the Symphony Ball. She was speaking with the deputy mayor for economic development. She wore emerald green and she was laughing, a sound he hadn't heard in years. He felt a jolt that was pure, undiluted shock. This was not the broken woman he'd cast out. This was a sovereign power. Seoyeon on his arm followed his gaze. "That's her, isn't it?" she murmured. "The ghost." Her voice held no sympathy, only analytical interest. Ilara felt his stare. She turned her head slowly. Their eyes met across 30 feet of crystal and champagne. She didn't glare, she didn't smile. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, the acknowledgement one rival's CEO gives another, and turned back to the deputy mayor. The dismissal was absolute. In that moment, the conflict became deeply, irreversibly personal for Kazuo. This was no longer business. It was a duel. He abandoned subtlety. He ordered a direct assault on a Vance Group warehouse, a fire meant to look like an electrical fault. The night it was to happen, his arsonists found the building surrounded by police cruisers. They're on a random safety inspection requested by the New Neighborhood Watch, a community group Ilara had helped fund. Once again, she was a step ahead, using the system as her shield. His frustration boiled over. He made his first true mistake. He contacted her directly, a burner phone, a text to her private line, a number he shouldn't have had. It read, "You are making noise, I can make silence, we should talk." It was a threat, but also an admission. He was negotiating. Ilara's reply was instantaneous. "Mr. Mori, all my lines are recorded for quality assurance. You are welcome to schedule a meeting through my office." She had turned his threat into a customer service complaint. When he didn't respond, she sent a follow-up link, the Vance Group's public booking calendar. The fury he felt was volcanic. It was Sioyon who forced the next fatal escalation. The Choi family's internal review was complete. Their conclusion, the Morikai Association was becoming a liability. The Vance Group was a symptom of Kazuo's weakening control. They presented him with an ultimatum: neutralize the Ilara problem cleanly, legally, before the wedding, or the merger would be postponed indefinitely. His legitimacy, the prize he had sought for a decade, was now conditional on defeating the wife he had discarded. Cornered, Kazuo reached for his oldest, most brutal tool, human leverage. He discovered Ilara had one vulnerability she had not armored, not a business, but a person, an elderly former nanny who had cared for her as a child in London, a woman named Mrs. Finch, now living in quiet retirement in Sussex. He had her discreetly monitored. She was Ilara's last tether to a life before him, a source of uncomplicated love. He planned to use her not to harm, but to force a parley, to make Ilara sit across from him. His agents in the UK reported the old woman's routine: tea at 3, a walk in the garden at 4. They would approach her gently, extend an invitation. It was a vile calculation, but it seemed sure. Kazuo waited for the confirmation call. It never came. Instead, he received a different call from a blocked number. Ilara's voice, colder than he'd ever heard it, came through the speaker. "You touched my family, Kazuo." The line crackled with static. "You think you know about leverage, you think it's about fear. Let me educate you. I have spent 2 years mapping every person you care about. Your mother in Kyoto, your estranged sister in Vancouver, the secret son your fiancé knows nothing about, attending boarding school in Switzerland." She paused, letting each name land like a hammer blow. "I have never touched them, because I am not you. But if your gaze ever flicks toward Mrs. Finch again, if a single one of your shadows falls near her garden gate, I will not call you. I will call the headmaster in Geneva, and then I will call Sioyon. Do you understand the leverage I hold?" The line went dead. Kazuo stood in his silent office, the phone limp in his hand. The room felt airless. She knew everything. His secret son, the one guarantee of his legacy hidden from the world, protected at immense cost. She had found him, and she had done nothing. That was her power, not the threat of action, but the terrifying promise of restraint. She had shown him that his most precious asset had been, for who knows how long, a piece on her board. A piece she had chosen not to play. In that moment, the last vestige of his arrogance shattered. This was not a contained problem. This was not a business rivalry. He was not hunting a ghost. The ghost was in his house, reading his mail, holding his heir in her sight. The war was no longer about ports and profits. It was about survival. And for the first time, Kazuo Mori, the Mafia boss who had never known fear, was truly afraid of the woman he had thrown away. Fear is a better strategist than arrogance. Kazuo Mori, for the first time in his adult life, operated from a position of sheer defensive terror. He immediately pulled all resources from his offensive against Ilara and redirected them into a fortress mentality. His son in Switzerland was moved under heavy guard to a new location, a secret within a secret. His mother in Kyoto was told, She was taking a sudden wellness retreat at a remote onsen. He was trying to shield his pieces. But the game was no longer on his board. It was on hers, and she was about to demonstrate the difference between reaction and strategy. Ilara's next move was not an attack, but an absorption. With Kazuo distracted and his financial flows frozen in panic, she launched a hostile takeover of sorts, not of a company, but of a market. She announced the Vance Alliance, a cooperative network offering her Verity chain technology, pooled insurance, and bulk purchasing power to any independent logistics operator in the city. Membership was cheap. The benefit was immunity. By joining, a business was folded into her legal and digital protective umbrella, making it more costly and risky for Morikai to target them. Dozens of businesses on the fringe of Kazuo's influence, who had lived in quiet fear for years, flooded to sign up. He was losing his territory not to raids, but to defection. His cash flow began to crimp. The monthly premiums from port officials were now a pure expense with no return. Protection racket payments dwindled as businesses found safer shelter. The legitimate fronts, the nightclubs, the import firms, started to bleed real money without the illicit subsidies. For the first time, the Morikai syndicate faced a budget deficit. And in the underworld, a deficit is a scent. It draws predators. The predator came in the form of the Yakuza faction from Fukuoka, the ones Kazuo had been frictioning with for months. They sensed weakness. A shipment of high-value electronics, a key Morikai revenue stream, was hijacked en route from the port, not by Vance Group but by the Fukuoka crew. It was a message: your fences are down, we are inside. Kazuo knew this was an existential threat. A syndicate that cannot protect its own goods is finished. He had to respond with overwhelming violence, a costly war he could no longer afford. He was being squeezed on two fronts, Ilara in the light, the Yakuza in the dark. And then came the twist, the moment that redefined everything that came before. Seo Yeon Choi requested a private meeting with Ilara Vance. It was held at the Vance Group's Docklands headquarters, a converted warehouse now buzzing with quiet efficiency. Seo Yeon arrived alone, without her usual entourage. She did not offer pleasantries. My family's merger with Mori is suspended, she stated. You have made him unstable. Unstable is dangerous. We want to know your endgame. Ilara, expecting a confrontation or a threat, was intrigued. My endgame is a viable, legitimate business ecosystem. He is a toxin in that system. Seo Yeon nodded. We agree. The simple statement hung in the air. The Choi family, it turned out, had their own calculus. Their merger with Kazuo was never about his criminal empire. It was about using his localized power to smooth their own large-scale construction projects. But Ilara had proven that his power was brittle. Furthermore, her Verity chain technology was something the Choi conglomerate desperately needed for its own international shipping divisions to comply with new global transparency regulations. They had been looking for a solution. Ilara had built it. We propose a pivot, Seo Yeon said. You cease your targeted erosion of Morikai's remaining legitimate assets. In return, we sever all ties with him, and the Choi Consortium enters a strategic partnership with the Vance Group. We become your primary investor and client for Verity Chain. You get capital, scale, and political cover. We get the technology and a clean partner. It was a cold, breathtaking offer. It would make Ilara's empire unchallengeable overnight. All she had to do was call off the dogs, leave Kazuo to his crumbling criminal world, and the wolves now circling it. Ilara considered the woman across from her. This was the ultimate vindication. The very family Kazuo sought to marry into was now offering to marry her instead. It was the perfect, bloodless victory. She could walk away rich, powerful, and secure. She said, and what happens to the small businesses in the Docklands, the ones he'll go back to squeezing when I'm no longer a threat? Seo Yeon's expression didn't change. That is not our concern. That is the cost of doing business. And there it was, the trap not set by Kazuo but by success itself, to become the very thing she had fought against, a distant, powerful entity that trades the vulnerable for stability. Ilara had a choice: accept the Choi deal and win everything, but abandon the mission that started it all, or refuse and fight two powerful enemies at once. She refused. Seo Yeon Choi left, her disappointment etched in ice. The message to Kazuo would be clear: His fiancée had tried to broker peace with his enemy and failed. His last bridge to legitimacy was burning, but Ilara knew the refusal had made her a target for the choice as well. The stakes had just been raised to a terrifying new level. Kazuo, learning of the failed meeting, misinterpreted it entirely. He saw it as Ilara's overreach, her greed in rejecting a deal that would have saved her. He believed she was now isolated. In his desperation, he concocted a final, brutal plan. If he could not break her businesses or threaten her loved ones, he would break her story. He would destroy the resilient comeback narrative that was her armor in the light. He unearthed the one piece of his original frame-up he had held in reserve, forged documents created 5 years ago that seemed to prove Ilara had knowingly approved the fraudulent transactions that sank Locus. At the time, he hadn't needed them. The chaos had been enough. Now he would use them. He leaked them to a notorious, scandal-hungry financial blog. The headline exploded, "Comeback Queen or Con Artist." New evidence suggests Ilara Vance masterminded her own first company's collapse. The effect was instant and brutal. The Vance alliance saw memberships pause. The city officials who championed her grew quiet. The social invitations dried up. The media, which loved a redemption story, loved a fall from grace even more. Ilara's hard-won legitimacy began to evaporate in the court of public opinion. This was the wait, it gets worse moment. Kazuo had finally found a weapon that could hurt her, the truth twisted into a perfect lie. Ilara's team was in crisis. Lawyers advised a quiet settlement, a retraction forced by lawsuits that would take years. Her PR firm suggested a tearful interview. Ilara listened, then dismissed them all. She had anticipated this. In her safe, next to the documents detailing Kazuo's crimes, was a single encrypted drive. On it was a digital timestamp, a cryptographic signature from a Swiss data vault, proving the forged documents had been created on a specific date, 2 weeks after Locus had already collapsed, and 6 months after Kazuo had kicked her out. He had fabricated the evidence post-fact. She had the proof. But releasing it would trigger the final, irreversible war. It would force everything into the open, his crimes, her knowledge, the secret son. It would be a nuclear option. She held the detonator. As she weighed this decision, a second shockwave hit, not from Kazuo, but from within her own empire. Old Man Rai, her first ally, was found badly beaten in his storage yard. The message, whispered to him by the thugs, was specific. "Tell your boss this is for the Fukuoka shipment. Her war, our payment." Kazuo had not ordered it. The Yakuza, blaming Ilara for the increased heat and port security that led to their own losses, had decided to send a message by attacking her closest associate. The conflict had metastasized. It was no longer a duel. It was a free-for-all, and innocent people were starting to bleed. Ilara stood at the window of her warehouse office, looking out at the rainy docks. The neon lights of the city blurred in the downpour. She had built an empire to dismantle a man, and in doing so, she had unleashed forces she could not control. She had the proof to clear her name and destroy Kazuo legally, but using it might get more people hurt. The Choi family was now a silent, hostile observer. The Yakuza was an active, violent threat, and Kazuo was a wounded, desperate animal. She had wanted him to see everything he failed to destroy. Now he was seeing it crumble under pressures he had helped create. But this was not victory, this was chaos. The final act would not be about business maneuvers or public relations. It would be about containment, about choosing what kind of victor she would be, one who preserves her empire at any cost, or one who finishes what she started, no matter the personal price. The rain fell harder against the glass. Somewhere out there in the glittering city, Kazuo Mori was staring at his own window, watching his world drown. And Ilara Vance knew, with cold certainty, that she would have to walk back into the flood to end it. Ilara Vance did not release the evidence. Not yet. She understood that truth in a vacuum is just more noise. To win, she needed to orchestrate the collapse, to place each piece so that when it fell, it would bury Kazuo Mori under the full weight of his own choices. Her plan had 3 phases: silence the Yakuza, neuter the Chois, and finally, hand Kazuo the rope to hang himself. It began with a phone call to a hospital room. She spoke to Old Man Rai, his voice weak but clear. "Who did this?" she asked. He gave her the name of the Fukuoka lieutenant who had delivered the beating. Ilara thanked him, promised he would want for nothing, and hung up. Then she used a back channel, a messaging service encrypted beyond any trace, and sent a single file to the Fukuoka Yakuza leadership. It was not a threat. It was a gift. The complete shipping manifests, security schedules, and warehouse locations for Kazuo's 3 most valuable remaining contraband stockpiles, the ones he had moved after the port seizures. The message attached read, "Payment for your lost shipment. The debt is his, not mine. Collect it." She was turning the Yakuza from a random threat into a targeted weapon. Within 72 hours, coordinated raids hit Morikai warehouses, millions in goods were seized. Kazuo's enforcers, stretched thin, were ambushed. The Yakuza, now richer and vindicated, had no further quarrel with Ilara. They had been paid with his assets. Phase 1 was complete. The external threat was redirected. Phase 2 involved Seo Yeon Choi. Ilara requested another meeting, this time at a neutral location, a private tea house. She did not bring a proposal. She brought a projection. She showed Seo Yeon the cryptographic proof that Kazuo had forged the documents. She then showed her something else, a detailed analysis of how the Choi family's own construction supply chain was being subtly inflated by Morikai-affiliated subcontractors, skimming millions. "You thought you were using him," Ilara said. "He was using you. Your merger isn't suspended. It's being parasitized." Seo Yeon's composure cracked just for a second. It was the fear of a businesswoman realizing she's been outmaneuvered. Ilara offered her the real deal. "Withdraw publicly, cite the scandal as reason. I will not pursue your family's minor complicity, and my Verity chain system will be available to you at a fair market rate. Once this is over, a clean deal with a clean partner." It was the same offer as before, but this time, Ilara held all the power. Seo Yeon, backed into a corner of financial and reputational sense, accepted. The Choi family issued a terse statement the next morning, severing all ties with Mori Holdings due to unforeseen legal uncertainties. Kazuo's last pillar of legitimacy was gone. Now it was time for Phase 3, Kazuo himself. Ilara knew that simply exposing the forgery would let him play the victim of a vengeful ex-wife. She needed him to implicate himself publicly and irrevocably. She used the one lever she knew would make him reckless, his son. She had a trusted, discreet courier, a woman who had once been Mrs. Finch's nursing student, deliver a physical letter to the boy's new secret school in New Zealand. The letter was not addressed to the boy. It was addressed to Kazuo, but sent to his son's location, knowing the security would intercept it and alert him. The letter contained no threats. It contained 2 items: a photograph of the boy, taken from a public distance at his previous school, happy and unaware, and a single line of text: "He looks like you. He deserves a father who isn't a fugitive. There is one way out." It was a calculated act of psychological warfare. By touching the untouchable symbol of his legacy, not with violence but with pity and a path, she triggered a panic deeper than any threat. Kazuo, isolated, financially bleeding, and now believing Ilara was about to drag his son into the open, did exactly what she predicted. He tried to run. He began liquidating everything he could, funneling cash into offshore accounts. In his haste, he made catastrophic errors. He tried to strong-arm a long-time, legitimate business partner into a quick, undervalued sale of a key property. The partner refused. Kazuo, in a fury, sent enforcers. This time, they were arrested on site. The partner had been warned anonymously and had called the police. The arrest made the news. The narrative began to shift. Kazuo Mori wasn't just a businessman with a scandal. He was resorting to gangster tactics. This was Ilara's moment. She released her evidence, but not to a blog. She gave the complete, time-stamped proof of the document forgery, along with a concise dossier linking Kazuo to the Morikai's known crimes, to a major respectable financial newspaper. The story was published not as a scandal, but as an investigation, the framing of Ilara Vance, how a mogul built an empire on forgery and fear. The impact was nuclear. The police, who had long turned a blind eye with the right payments, now found themselves under public pressure to act. Kazuo's remaining legitimate partners fled. Banks froze his accounts. A warrant was issued for his arrest on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and extortion based on the new, public evidence. The final scene was not in a boardroom or a dark alley. It was in the pouring rain, on the street outside the Vance Group's new headquarters, a gleaming glass tower that had once been a moribund asset of the Choi family purchased by Ilara with her now secure financing. Kazuo Mori stood there, alone. His empire was gone. His future was a prison cell. His son's location was known to authorities. He had nothing left to protect. He looked up at the top-floor lights, knowing she was there. He didn't come to threaten or plead. He came, perhaps, to understand. Ilara, watching from her window, saw the small, defeated figure on the sidewalk. She made a decision. She took the private elevator down. She walked out into the rain, without an umbrella, and stood before him. They were just a woman and a man in the downpour, the ghosts of a shared past between them. He looked at her, his expensive suit soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead. "You won," he said, the words barely audible over the rain. "I didn't want to win," she replied, her voice steady. "I wanted you to see everything you failed to destroy. It wasn't me. It was the idea that something you cast aside could ever be worthless. My company, my name, me." He flinched as if struck. The real blow wasn't financial or legal. It was the dismantling of his own narrative, the story he'd told himself that he was the prime mover, the one who decided what had value. She had proven him wrong at every turn. "What happens now?" he asked, a hollow man. "You turn yourself in," she said. "You plead guilty to the financial crimes. In return, I will ensure the prosecution has no interest in your son. He keeps his name, his inheritance from his mother's side, his future. You take only your own punishment." It was the final, merciful twist. She was offering him a way to protect the one pure thing he loved, by accepting responsibility for all the corrupt things he'd done. He stared at her, searching for the trap. There was none, just the brutal, clean logic of her victory. He nodded once, a shallow, broken movement. Then he turned and walked away into the rain, toward the waiting shadows where his lawyer and the authorities likely already were. Ilara stood there, watching him go. The rain washed over her, but she felt no cold. She felt a quiet, immense stillness. It was over. She had collected what was owed, not his money, not his empire, his acknowledgement, his defeat. Back in her office, she made one final call, to the board of the newly formed Vansjoy Logistics Alliance. She resigned as CEO. The room on speakerphone erupted in confused protest. She explained calmly, she had built the company to solve a problem. The problem was solved. She was now the problem, a figure too associated with a violent public feud. For the empire to grow clean, she needed to step away. She would remain the majority shareholder, a silent partner. She recommended Seo Yeon Choi as her successor. The surprising detail, the final reveal, was her reason. It wasn't exhaustion or fear. It was clarity. She had never wanted an empire. She had wanted justice. And having achieved it, she was free. The empire she built would now serve its original purpose, to protect the small, to operate with transparency, to be the shield she had needed. But she no longer needed to be its sword. The news of her resignation shocked the business world. They called it a mysterious retreat, but those who knew understood. Ilara Vance had returned not as a wife, not as a CEO, but as a force of nature. She had corrected a cosmic imbalance. And then, her work done, she receded. She spent her days at a foundation she established, one that provided legal and business resources to survivors of financial abuse and corporate sabotage. She visited Mrs. Finch in Sussex. She lived quietly, powerfully, on her own terms. Kazuo Mori pleaded guilty and received a 12-year sentence. His son visited him once. The boy, older now, asked a single question: why? Kazuo had no answer that mattered. The empire he failed to destroy was not just Ilara's company. It was the legacy of decency she preserved for his own child. In the end, she had built everything, even the remnants of his conscience. The rain that night had washed away the last of his illusions, leaving only the hard, clean truth of his failure and her absolute, quiet victory. Ilara Vance's story is more than a revenge fantasy. It's a forensic study in transformation, a map of how profound betrayal can be alchemized into unshakable power. Her journey mirrors a documented psychological pattern: the abandoned spouse who, through sheer necessity, accesses a deeper tier of resilience and strategic clarity. She didn't just rebuild a company, she rebuilt herself into the architect of her own fate, and in doing so, redefined what victory looks like. The lingering question her story leaves us with isn't about business or revenge. It's about value. How often do we, like Kazuo Mori, underestimate what we discard? How often do we mistake silence for surrender or kindness for weakness? Ilara's empire stands as a monument to a simple, terrifying truth. The most dangerous force in the world is not ruthless ambition. It is quiet, meticulous patience with a long memory. It is the absolute conviction of someone who has lost everything except the will to rebuild it better. Her final act, stepping away from the throne she fought so hard to build, reveals the ultimate sophistication. She understood that the point of power is not to hold it forever, but to use it to correct an imbalance, and then let the system you've created thrive on its own principles. She traded the crown for her freedom, proving that true power is the ability to walk away on your own terms. This narrative taps into a deep, universal vein of justice satisfaction. We watch not just to see the villain fall, but to witness the profound dignity of a comeback built on merit, strategy, and an unwavering moral core. It's the Cinderella story weaponized, not with a fairy godmother, but with a spreadsheet and a steel spine. So what do you think? Was Ilara's choice to resign the final masterstroke, or did she leave the game too soon? Could Kazuo Mori have ever truly understood the magnitude of his error before he stood broken in the rain? And in your own life, what is the thing you were told you couldn't rebuild? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story of resilience and reinvention resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own strength or sparked a fire to reclaim something, then do us a favor. Hit that like button. It helps this channel grow and bring more powerful stories to light. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications. We're just getting started, and we're building a community here of people who believe in second acts, in quiet comebacks, and in the world-shifting power of a plan patiently executed. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of this story. Remember, the most formidable empires aren't always the loudest. Sometimes they're the ones built in the quiet, between the lines, by those everyone else stopped seeing, until they couldn't be ignored.